Yo, what is up guys? Daleboy here, aka Blue Collar Sports TV. Hopefully you guys are doing well. If you're new here, smash that like, hit subscribe, all of that good stuff. Apologies, long time no see. Haven't really been in the mood to talk about boxing the last week or so, plus I've been super busy, so it is what it is. And quite frankly, there's not too much to talk about now. However, I wanted to touch on the topic of Felix Cash. Felix Cash, British middleweight, went into a fight this weekend with Tyler Denny for the European middleweight title. Tyler Denny is what I would describe as a bit of a Cinderella story in boxing. Turned pro to no fanfare whatsoever, no real crazy amateur credentials or anything like that. Early in his career, he lost to the likes of Linus Adofia and Rhys Cartwright. In fact, he got stopped by Rhys Cartwright, and it looked like, you know, Tyler Denny would always be like an English level middleweight, just below British level, not quite good enough to win a British title. However, in recent years, Tyler Denny has really revitalised his career, put some good wins together. He upset a few unbeaten prospects, took some undefeated records, became the English champion, then becoming the European champion. But going into this fight with Felix Cash, he was the underdog. Felix Cash, a much bigger puncher, a fighter who is generally considered to be a lot more talented. He's a much bigger middleweight as well. Plus, he's the A-side. He was the A-side going into this fight. So I think most of us expected Cash to win. I did, but I still didn't think he'd look great. But regardless, that's not what happened. Felix Cash ended losing this fight by a technical decision. He lost on all the judges' cards, and rightfully so. Tyler Denny went in there and roughed up Felix Cash. He got close. The southpaw stance of Tyler Denny was giving Cash problems. Cash could never really get Denny's respect. And from early on, you could see Felix Cash was uncomfortable. And early on, in fact, watching that fight, I felt he would take a way out if one presented itself. And that's exactly what he did, because to me it looked like he shook his head when he was being checked by the doctors. And he must have known there was no way of him winning that fight. So for me, the fact that he seemed to quit is a damning indictment on his dedication to boxing. Because again, at that point in the fight, there was no way he felt he was up. He couldn't have done, but he decided to quit anyway. And it's interesting because there's becoming a theme, just a little bit of pattern recognition when it comes to Tony Sims fighters or former Tony Sims fighters, as is the case with Felix Cash. I believe he was with Adam Booth for this fight with Tyler Denny. But ever since a certain incident, aka Conor Benn testing positive, it feels like his fighters, or fighters who were once affiliated with him, have died a death. They can't punch anymore. They don't look strong anymore. I wonder why that could be. Joe Cordina, for example, winning his world title back in 2022 in June against Kenichi Ogawa. One punch knockout, one of the best knockouts you'll see of that year. He looked really devastating in that fight. But the following two fights, following Conor Benn getting busted for PEDs, he fought Edward Vasquez in Monte Carlo, arguably lost that fight, big underdog, Edward Vasquez. He then fought another big underdog in Anthony Kakache in Saudi Arabia. That was on the undercard of Tyson Fury versus Alexander Usyk, and Joe Cordina got destroyed in that fight. His power just left him, his strength left him. There was nothing there. You look at Felix Cash himself, prior to Conor Benn, getting banned, Felix Cash put on a really good run. He knocked out Jack Cullen in 2019, very tough fighter at domestic level. He knocked out Jason Welborn, another tough fighter at domestic level in and around the middleweight division. And in April of 2021, he took a fight against Denzel Bentley, a fight in which at the time was very anticipated because people expected it to be a 50-50 fight. There were people picking Felix Cash, there were people picking Denzel Bentley. It was that sort of fight. Lo and behold, Felix Cash goes in there and looks like a prime Gennady Golovkin, totally destroying Denzel Bentley. Denzel Bentley being the same guy who was able to take Janibek Alimkhanuly the distance, was never really all that close to getting knocked out in that fight, but against Felix Cash, he made Cash look like $1 million. Following that Bentley fight, Cash's performances have got so worse. You know, struggled against Magomed Madaev. He struggled in an 8-rounder against a journeyman called Celso Neves. And then he loses to Tyler Denny, a fighter who was smaller, who had 1 knockout on his record. By the way, Tyler Denny still hurt Felix Cash. But Cash, you know, didn't have the strength, didn't have the firepower to deal with Denny. But he dealt with guys like Jack Cullen, Jason Welborn, and Denzel Bentley. Denzel Bentley being a better fighter than Tyler Denny, in my opinion. But all of a sudden, Cash can't punch. Hasn't had a knockout since Denzel Bentley. Then we go to Conor Benn himself, you know. Since he's come back, he's fought 2 nondescript opponents. An unknown Mexican, who he couldn't get out of there, and Peter Dobson. Again, a domestic level club fighter in the USA. Went life and death with that guy, by the way. Hasn't been close to knocking anybody out since. By the way, what happened with Craig Richards? Why was Craig Richards out of the ring for so long? I've heard a few things, by the way, because it was unexplained. I've heard a few rumours why he was out, another Tony Sims fighter. Regardless, he comes back against Willie Hutchinson and looks terrible. What's going on in that gym? Have they changed the water supply? Have they changed the supplements? Have they changed the culinary options? What's gone on there? Because again, Craig Richards, another one, looked terrible on his comeback. And also out of the ring for quite some time with no real reason, you know? I've heard a couple of rumours, you know, in regards to silent bans and things like that. You know, why was Felix Cash, by the way, outside the ring for so long? Why was he outside the ring for so long? It's funny, since Conor Benn has tested positive, all these guys who were looking good at that time seem to have fell off a cliff. If it's one fighter, you can understand, you know, just a coincidence, but it's happening with so many fighters, including with Conor Benn himself. Oops, what's going on here? But yeah, these guys are looking sloppy. They're looking average. And they're looking like they're going nowhere fast, you know? None of these guys are. Whereas at one point in time, you looked at some of these guys and felt, yeah, man, these guys can do something. You know, people were talking about Felix Cash being a future middleweight title contender. People were talking about Joe Cordina possibly going to lightweight and getting a belt. People were becoming more and more sold with Conor Benn, you know? Many people were picking him to knock out Eubank Jr. Now all of a sudden, he can't knock out cab drivers from America and Mexico. Guys who aren't full-time boxers. It's peak for Tony Sims, you know, and his fighters and his former fighters. Again, Cash isn't with Tony Sims anymore, but this drop-off was happening before he left. You know, after looking damn good for a little period of time. We'll see how these guys develop, you know. We'll see how these guys develop, but it looks like they're going nowhere fast after looking promising, you know, to varying degrees. But yeah, Felix Cash gets beat by Tyler Denny. A case of hard work beating talent, because Cash is more naturally talented than a guy like Tyler Denny, but the difference is, Tyler Denny wants to be a fighter. He trains. He's in shape. He's got a gas tank. He's got a chin. He comes to fight. You know? And that was enough to overcome Felix Cash, ultimately. Just a guy who trained harder. A guy who worked harder. And a guy who wanted it more. And that's it. So congrats to him. I'm glad he beat Felix Cash, to be honest. But yeah, share your thoughts below. Beanie Guy Del Boy. Peace.